Hi, I'm Katie Stone. Welcome to Dystopia. This is the fifth in a series of videos designed to open new pathways into the genre for those unsure where to begin, or for the hardened dystopians out there to offer an opportunity to return to first principles and try and work out what drew you to dystopianism in the first place. The videos are designed to be watched in order, but I hope you can still get something out of it if you're just dipping in. There are more learning resources, reading lists and ways to get involved on my website at katiemcgregorstone.co.uk. But for now, wherever you are on your journey with dystopianism and however much time or energy you have for this today, you're welcome. In my previous videos I talked about dystopianism as a genre, how do we define it, and dystopia's relation to utopias, their imaginary good place counterparts. Today I want to start talking about the content of dystopias. What do dystopias look like? And I'm going to start off by talking about space. So not outer space, but the spaces of dystopian text, the spaces the characters inhabit, the cities, the worlds, and how space is controlled in dystopias. The example text I'm going to be using to talk about space is Yevgeny Zamyatin's novel We. This is one of the earliest ever dystopian novels, written 20 years before George Orwell's 1984, and it was heavily influential on the genre. Orwell talks about reading We while he was writing 1984. So for those of you who haven't read it, and I would recommend checking it out, but for those who haven't yet, here's a brief summary. We takes place in a distant, far future after the 200 Years' War has ravaged the human population. The society of We is called One State, and it takes the form of a great glass city surrounded by a wall which none of the inhabitants ever leave. It's utterly self-sufficient. One State is ruled on principles of unity and efficiency. So the people there are encouraged to think of themselves not as individuals or as communities, but as cogs in the machine, as the kind of embodiments of the state. The story follows one of these people, D503 is what he's called, because the people do not have names, they just have numbers to identify them. In fact, they are called the numbers. D503 is the architect of the spaceship, the Integral, which is being built and will be filled with the teachings of One State and sent out into the solar system to hopefully grow their society. D503 is a true believer, and the novel takes the form of his journal, which he's planning to send up with the Integral to encourage the people of Mars or Saturn to live by One State principles. But the story tracks how he moves from being totally convinced and thinking that he's living in a utopia to feeling divided, to feeling confused, as he comes into contact with revolutionaries and dissidents and starts doubting the teaching of One State. I will be talking about Zamyatin's novel as it was translated by Clarence Brown in 1993. Unfortunately, I don't speak Russian, so all the quotations are from this English translation. And to illustrate it, I have used these series of images by the artist and illustrator Eda Akaltun, which I think really well capture the kind of strangeness of Zamyatin's imaginary glass city. So I'm going to begin by returning to this question that I keep asking of what is a dystopia, and dive into what dystopian space looks like and what are the different methods of controlling space which we can see in We. I'm then going to move to looking at a real life dystopian space and how it compares to Zamyatin's imagined city. before ending on the utopian horizon that dystopian space conjures up. How could we fight dystopian spaces? How could we imagine utopian ones, even in the midst of dystopia? So, to just give us a brief recap, I'm going to return to this definition from the Oxford English Dictionary, which reads that a dystopia is an imaginary place or condition in which everything is as bad as possible, opposed to utopia. I've had some problems with this definition, so I've made some corrections, some emendations to it. And so as it currently stands, and we keep adding to it, as it currently stands, the definition reads that a dystopia is an imaginary place or condition which is bad in a way which is not hellish, natural, traditional, or chaotic, opposed not to all utopias, but to authoritarian, nostalgic, bordered utopias, while still being oriented towards a utopian horizon. So I think this definition is better, it's more specific, and it avoids some of what I think are the misleading generalizations we see in the original definition. But it still has its own problems. I'm still using this word bad, for example, which is a really broad, vague, general term, which could mean lots of things. So I'm going to start off now trying to dig into what's specifically bad about a dystopia. What do dystopias look like? What makes a dystopia bad? And as I've mentioned, I'm going to start by talking about space. So the rooms, the buildings, the streets, the cities, the worlds imagined in dystopian text and controlled within those texts. In what ways are they bad? How does their badness manifest? These are the questions I'm going to start by asking. How can you control space? What are the methods that are used to control space in these dystopias? So method one, which I've identified, is enclosure. The city of We, the great glass city, is surrounded by a great green wall. Outside the wall, they believe, is just uninhabited wasteland. They never go out. They exist only inside the wall. So this is what D503 says when he is looking out and through the wall. He says, "From out of the boundless green ocean beyond the wall, a savage wave of roots, flowers, branches, leaves rushed at me, rose up on its hind quarters, would have swamped me, would have turned me, a man, that most delicate and precise of mechanisms, into..." He trails off. "But fortunately between me and the wild green ocean was the glass of the wall. Oh, mighty, divinely delimited wisdom of walls, boundaries! It is perhaps the most magnificent of all inventions. Man ceased to be a wild animal only when he built the first wall. Man ceased to be a wild man only when we built the green wall. Only when, by means of that wall, we isolated our perfect machine world from the irrational, ugly world of trees, birds, and animals." So what we're drawing attention to in this is the idea that walls aren't just naturally occurring. It's not just obvious why you would have rules. Rather, D503 is saying that walls are an invention. They are a technology, and they are what divides humanity from the rest of the animal world. So we see that the building of a wall creates an inside and an outside. It creates this kind of binary between what is inside, which is civilized, which is ordered, which is delicate and precise, characterized by machines, and what is outside, which is wild and savage and animal and irrational, right? So this is one way in which space is controlled. You build the wall, you make people fear what is on the outside, and you get the sense of division between the inside and the outside. You create something to be afraid of. But enclosing the city isn't enough. You can imagine a city which was surrounded by a wall, but where it was chaotic and unruly and uncontrolled inside. So this brings us to the second method of control, which is standardization. In the city of one state, everybody has one room that they live in. In every room there is the same bed, the same desk, the same chair. They all wear the same uniform. Everything is standardized, well ordered and neatly laid out. And this is something that D503 reflects on when he's going on his morning walk. He says, as though right then for the first time in my life I saw everything, the unalterably straight streets, the sparkling glass of the sidewalks, the divine parallelepipeds of the transparent dwellings, the squared harmony of our grey-blue ranks. I had to look up parallelepipeds. Basically, they're like cubes, so they're the rooms that everyone lives in, but rather than the sides being made up of squares, each side is a parallelogram, so it's kind of a rectangle at a slant. Anyway, that's what those are. And then there came a moment, a leap across the centuries, from plus to minus. I recalled, association by contrast apparently, I suddenly recalled a picture in the museum. One of the avenues they had back then, after 20 centuries, a stunningly garish, mixed-up crush of people, wheels, animals, posters, trees, colours, birds, and they say it really was like that. It could have been like that. It all struck me as so unlikely, so idiotic, that I couldn't help it. I burst out laughing. So we see that the space of one state is so different to our own, what he calls the ancient city of the 20th century, that it's laughable to D503. To him, he can only see that this utterly standardized, utterly ordered way of laying out the city is the only way. Otherwise, you have this mixed up crush of people. You can see with the animals and the trees, it feels like an invasion of the forces that are supposedly kept out by the Great Green Wall. But this still isn't enough. Okay, so we've got enclosure, we've got standardization, but as we can see, the people of this ancient 20th century city, they're still walking down avenues. They're still in a city, an industrialized space. It's not actually wild. So what this shows is that you can have this really heavily controlled space, but you also have to control the way in which people move around that space, the way in which they're allowed to occupy it. What does in fact happen in We is that this breaks down, that as more people start rebelling, the streets become chaotic spaces. So a key method of controlling space is what I'm calling regimentation. So the idea that all movement, that all motion around the space needs to be regimented. When D503 is talking about this, he's talking to us about the table of hours, which is what is used to regiment their day. It's the timetable which dictates all of their movements. So he writes, all of us as school children, and you too perhaps, he's addressing his potential readers on Mars here, used to read that greatest of all monuments of ancient literature that has come down to us, the railroad timetable. But set even this next to the table of hours, and what you'll see is graphite and diamond. They're both one and the same element, C, carbon, but how eternal, transparent and brilliant is the diamond. Who doesn't catch his breath when he ruffles through the pages of the railroad timetable? But the table of hours, it turns each one of us right there in broad daylight into a steel, six-wheeled epic hero. Every morning with six-wheel precision, at the very same hour and the very same minute, we get up, millions of us, as though we were one. At the very same hour, millions of us as one, we start work. Later, millions as one, we stop. And then, like one body with a million hands, at one and the same second, according to the table, we lift the spoon to our lips. So we see here that it's not only that a wall has been built around the space of the city. It's not only that within the space everyone has their own room exactly the same, all the streets are exactly the same, all the buildings are exactly the same. It's also that the way that everyone moves around is exactly the same. The people of one state, the numbers as they're called, go on their morning walks together. They march in rows of 4, and that's their morning walk. As we see here, they each lift the spoon to their lips when they're eating at the same time. It's this incredible level of control of space. So, having talked through these 3 core methods of controlling space, and of course there are many more, but these are the ones I wanted to pick out. I want to turn now to thinking about the real life spaces that have influenced dystopias. So Zamyatin has obviously invented his great glass city. Nothing like that in the 1920s was known. But he is doing so in dialogue with real spaces, which are also enclosed, standardized and regimented. And I think the best example of this that's been most influential on dystopias is the space of the prison. So in order to talk about the prison, I'm going to refer to the work of the French theorist and philosopher Michel Foucault, and specifically to his book Discipline and Punish, The Birth of the Prison. Now I'm going to be making another video specifically about this book where I'll go into its arguments in more detail. But for now, just to give you the broad strokes outline, Foucault is examining this phenomenon of the birth of the prison. So he says in France in the 18th century, there weren't that many prisons. It wasn't the standard thing for if you're found guilty of a crime, you will be sent to prison. And what prisons that there were, which were more like jails or dungeons, were utterly different from the modern system. So even though we're encouraged to think of prisons as a kind of natural and normal part of the criminal justice system, Foucault wants us to look at them as something which is strange. And he's not just looking at prisons in isolation. He wants to find out why this change has occurred and what this strange modern prison, what does it look like? He doesn't just look at this in isolation. He looks at prisons as a part of what he calls the disciplinary society, which includes prisons, schools, factories, hospitals, all of these different institutions, all of these different aspects of life, which he says are governed by discipline. And at the heart of discipline for Foucault is the control of space. So he writes, in the first instance, discipline proceeds from the distribution of individuals in space. Discipline sometimes requires enclosure, as we've discussed, but the principle of enclosure is neither constant, nor indispensable, nor sufficient in disciplinary machinery. It's not enough to lock people away. This machinery works space in a much more flexible and detailed way. So, the aim of the disciplinary space was to be able, at each moment, to supervise the conduct of each individual, to assess it, to judge it, to calculate its qualities or merits. It was a procedure, therefore, aimed at knowing, mastering, and using. So what Foucault is arguing here is that the function of prisons used to be to lock people away and keep them from the rest of society. It wasn't a common punishment. It was just one part of a much broader criminal justice system where execution and torture was a much more accepted part of the system. But in these 18th century imaginary prisons, as we see here depicted by the Italian artist Piranesi, the prison functions primarily to keep people locked in. So we can see this row of cells down the bottom with bars on the windows. They're places where people are caged, and they are in the shadows, they're in the dark, they can't be seen. And the prison is this frightening space, this space of violence and torture, of chaos and confusion. You can see there's massive bodies here where it's hard to tell who is who or what's happening. This is what the kind of prison used to conjure up. It was just something to be feared as a punishment. And what Foucault is saying is that that isn't what prisons are like anymore, or that's not all that prisons are doing anymore. Now prisons are much more akin to the great glass city of We, in that they are well lit, they are well ordered, that there isn't chaos and confusion. Everyone has a set place to be, and they're allowed to move around in a particularly regimented way. Right, so that's what he's appealing to, is the idea of saying this isn't just a movement from the dark, frightening prison to the light, beautiful, good prison. This isn't just a movement of criminal justice becoming more benign or more gentle or more civilized. This is a new form of control. This idea that it's better to be in the light than to be kept in the darkness is something that he's contesting. He's saying, no, this is a way of studying the people who are put in prison. It's not just about locking them away anymore. It's about knowing them. It's about mastering them, and it's about putting them to use. So for Foucault, the ideal model of the disciplinary society is Jeremy Bentham's plan of the panopticon. So this is a plan that the English philosopher Jeremy Bentham, who was interested in utilitarianism, so making everything as efficient as possible, a plan that he discusses as a potential way of organising a prison. So he didn't build this, but he discusses it as a potential method of building a prison. And Foucault thinks that this is very important to understanding the disciplinary society. So he writes, Jeremy Bentham's panopticon is the architectural figure of the disciplinary society. It represents it. We know the principle on which it was based. At the periphery, an annular building made up of rooms. At the centre, a tower. This tower is pierced with wide windows that open onto the inner side of the ring. The peripheric building, so the building round the outside, is divided into cells, each of which extends the whole width of the building. They have two windows, one on the inside corresponding to the windows of the tower, the other on the outside allows the light to cross the cell from one end to the other. All that is needed then is to place a supervisor in the central tower and to shut up in each cell a madman, a patient, a condemned man, a worker or a schoolboy. By the effect of backlighting, one can observe from the tower, standing out precisely against the light, the small captive shadows in the cells of the periphery. They are like so many cages, so many small theatres, in which each actor is alone, perfectly individualized and constantly visible. So this is what we see here. This is an illustration that Foucault includes in his book. The idea is that the prisoner is always on view. In the dungeon, if you wanted to view the prisoners in their cells, you'd have to have someone go down into the dark and patrol the corridors. It would be very inefficient. In the panopticon, you can just have one guard in the tower. He can see all of the prisoners. And this is what Foucault points out, crucially, there doesn't even need to be a guard in the tower because the prisoners can't see into the tower. So they don't know if there's a guard in there or not, or they don't know if the guards who are in there are looking at them at any one time. They could be being watched, but they're not necessarily. And what this means is that they have to act as if they're being watched all the time. They can never hide. So what Foucault wants to say is that even though this light and airy space which the panopticon creates seems much better, seems much nicer than the dungeon that Piranesi is imagining in the dark, this frightening space. That the panopticon is frightening too in its own way. As he puts it, the panopticon reverses the principle of the dungeon, or rather of its free functions, to enclose, to deprive of light and to hide. It preserves only the first and eliminates the other two. Full lighting and the eye of a supervisor capture better than darkness, which ultimately protected. Visibility is a trap. So here you can't even hide anymore. There's no possibility of escape. You are on view all of the time. Foucault notes that the panopticon did influence the real building of prisons. This was, directly implemented as a plan. But he also stresses that this isn't only where the influence of the panopticon is felt, that the point of the disciplinary society is that all areas of life are included within this panoptic or disciplinary logic. So he writes, as opposed to the ruined prisons littered with mechanisms of torture to be seen in Piranesi's engravings, the panopticon presents a cruel, ingenious cage. The fact that it should have given rise even in our own time to so many variations, projected or realized, is evidence of the imaginary intensity that it has possessed for almost 200 years. But the panopticon must not be understood as a dream building. It is the diagram of a mechanism of power reduced to its ideal form. Is it surprising that prisons resemble factories, schools, barracks, hospitals, which all resemble prisons? So he's saying it's not only in prisons that the idea of surveillance is everywhere. We also see it in factories, in schools, the idea that everyone should be visible at all times. There should be no space to hide. That is key to disciplinary society. And it's also key to dystopias. So our fourth method of controlling space is surveillance. I've mentioned that the city of We is a glass city, but really this is one of the most central ways in which space is controlled in Zamyatin's novel, is the fact that everyone in We can be seen at all times. There is nowhere to hide. And this is most obvious when D503 is reflecting on the only exception to this rule, where he says, he's recounting coming home from work for one day, and he says, once home, I passed quickly by the desk, handed the duty officer my pink ticket, and got the pass to use the blinds. So in this world, one state regulates all sexual activity, so you have to be issued with a pink ticket in order to have sex. We get to use the blinds only on sex day. Otherwise we live in broad daylight inside these walls that seem to have been fashioned out of bright air, always on view. We have nothing to hide from one another. Besides, this makes it easier for the guardians to carry out their burdensome, noble task, the guardians being the secret police of one state. No telling what might go on otherwise. Maybe it was the strange opaque dwellings of the ancients that gave rise to their pitiful cellular psychology. My sick home is my castle. Brilliant, right? So sick in brackets here means that the previous word is an error. You usually use it if you're quoting someone and they've got a spelling mistake in their original text. But here D503 is saying that the idea of having my home is always going to be an error. It's always the home of the state. There is no individual home. Right, so we can see here exactly the logic of the panopticon. Everyone is always living out in the bright air. They're always surveilling one another, and this stops them ever from rebelling. They are always known, always mastered, always used by the state. The guardians are watching, and they are watching one another. So surveillance gives us the fourth in this means of controlling space that I've associated with dystopias. So this is my addition to the definition, which is getting a little bit bulky now, but that's the nature of this. We're gonna add to it more and more. This now reads: A dystopia is an imaginary place or condition which is bad in a way which is not hellish, natural, traditional, or chaotic, opposed to authoritarian, nostalgic, bordered utopias, while still being oriented towards a utopian horizon. In dystopias, space is controlled through enclosure, standardization, regimentation, and surveillance, much like in a prison. Okay, so I'm going to end now by talking a little bit about prison abolition, because if we remember, dystopianism is oriented towards a utopian horizon. So when we're thinking about space, what does that utopian horizon look like? Well, I think it looks like the abolition of prisons, because Foucault is talking about how the disciplinary society operates in all areas of life, how we're all surveilled through CCTV, through data tracking, through schools, through hospitals, etc., etc. But, as he puts it, it would be hypocritical or naive to believe that the law was made for all in the name of all. It would be more prudent to recognise that it was made for the few and that it was brought to bear upon others. So in the imagined dystopian world of one state, everyone is equally surveilled, right? Everyone is equally in prison. But when we're using that dystopia to reflect back on and critique our world, we must acknowledge that even though we are all surveilled, we are not all equally surveilled. We are not all equally in prison. And it's with that in mind that I'm going to end with these words from Angela Y. Davis, who is a scholar of prisons, who was herself formerly incarcerated for her political activism with the Black Panther Party. There was a big campaign to free Angela Davis. And Davis wrote this book called Are Prisons Obsolete? In which she discusses the possibilities of prison abolition, of a world beyond this dystopian control of space. So Davis writes, "In most circles, prison abolition is simply unthinkable and implausible. Prison abolitionists are dismissed as utopians and idealists whose ideas are at best unrealistic and impracticable, and at worst mystifying and foolish. This is a measure of how difficult it is to envision a social order that does not rely on the threat of sequestering people in dreadful places designed to separate them from their communities and families." And she's speaking in a US context, but I think we can definitely apply her ideas more broadly. She asks, why do we take prison for granted? While a relatively small proportion of the population has ever directly experienced life inside prison, this is not true in poor Black and Latino communities. Neither is it true for Native Americans or for certain Asian American communities. But even among those people who must regrettably accept prison sentences as an ordinary dimension of community life, it is hardly acceptable to engage in serious public discussions about prison life or radical alternatives to prison. It is as if prison were an inevitable fact of life, like birth and death. What would it mean to imagine a system in which punishment is not allowed to become the source of corporate profit? How can we imagine a society in which race and class are not primary determinants of punishment, or one in which punishment itself is no longer the central concern in the making of justice? So, these are my thoughts on the control of space in dystopias, the real-life dystopias that those imagined spaces are in dialogue with, are critiquing, and the utopian horizon that these dystopian spaces are oriented towards. As I mentioned before, there'll be another video on Foucault's Discipline and Punish and how it relates to dystopias, and there are more learning resources available on my website at katiemcgregorstone.co.uk. But for now, thank you and you're welcome.